For today's message, I wanted to do a presentation on God and country, or if you will, as the United States of America, as one nation under God. And so you see on your screen here the Pledge of Allegiance. And we're going to start there with the history of the pledge. But when we're done, you're going to see, people just do not get it. I want you to, when we're done with this, I want you to see the mindset and thinking of our founding fathers. And to see the way they set up a government and why, and how religion, particularly the Christian religion, fits in as part of that, an integral part of that. Not according to my words, but according to their words. So let's begin with the pledge here. We have, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now that is not the original form of our national pledge. So we can go through the history of it. It's kind of interesting, and it shows you, if you will, I would say, the American worldview through the centuries and how Americans think collectively, or most of us think. Its origins, and you see the picture of the man who wrote it, of Francis Bellamy. And he was the son of a Baptist preacher, moved to Rome, New York when he was 5 years old, and was a member of his father's church, a Baptist church in Rome, New York, the rest of his life. He's listed in the history books as a Baptist minister and Christian socialist. That's his background. So this is what we call the original pledge. I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now notice there's no mention of God in this thing, even though this man is an ordained minister and the son of a minister. But, and I checked the history. The history goes back farther than this, and I want you to see as it gets interesting. There was a pledge before Bellamy's pledge, written by a veteran of the Civil War named Balch. And Balch's pledge says, we give our heads and hearts to God and our country, one language, one flag. Up until 1923, what Americans did when they pledged a flag is they said both pledges. They said them together, one after another. The history I read didn't tell me which one they said first or which one they said second. So it would sound something like this. I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We give our heads and hearts to God and our country, one language, one flag. Now, of course, that earlier pledge comes from the Civil War period. And it gives you an idea. You go back and farther in American history, and it was a normal, get this, a normal thing to give your head and heart to God and your country. This is a responsible, normal, sensible, intelligent thing to do. Almost like telling someone they should get saved. I mean, you know, you give your head and heart to God first, and then to your country. And that's what people pledged. So, in 1923, they had I'm saying it's called here. Yeah, they had a conference called the National Flag Conference in 1923. And at that conference, they took some things, they came up with, I don't know if they really used both of them, but this became the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. 1923. God is not mentioned in it. So, well, how did God get back? Like I say, in the original Balch's pledge, God is in there. You're supposed to give yourself to God and then your country. In the original pledge by Bellamy, it's not mentioned. Well, we get to the year 1954, and joint resolution of Congress was passed that added to it the phrase, under God. Well, who proposed this? Where did this came from? The chief proponent of this was the President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower was in charge of our forces, the armed forces of the Allies in Europe during World War II. He was a war hero thus, and he became president. And Eisenhower wanted this to become part of the pledge, and when it was voted on, there was no debate. He said, okay, yeah, let's do it. He said, well, what was Eisenhower's thinking? And this is interesting. The original pledge from Bouch came out of a veteran of the Civil War. During wartime, Americans tend to be more prayerful. They acknowledge God. They ask for His help. They realize we need His grace. And so putting something about God in a pledge during the wartime always seems to make more sense. Well, what kind of war was Eisenhower in? He was in what we call the Cold War. And our great enemy was the Soviet Union, a communist country that as their chief doctrine is, there is no God. Thus, you should work for the state and the state will take care of you. Minus God, there's no God. And when you looked at what the Soviet Union was like, the concentration camps, the executions, people were treated without value, and they tortured people often. And when he looked at that, he said, if that's a nation without God, then we need to be a nation under God. That was his thinking. And he said, this is what happens if you take God out. So we'll put him in. So he did this with the pledge first. And it was unanimous, and that became the law of the land. This is not a new thing as a one nation under God. Well, I'm going to show you the founding fathers having those same ideas, actually more developed than Eisenhower. Historians traditionally have kind of put Eisenhower down, like he played a lot of golf and the nation kind of ran itself well, and he really didn't do much as a president because he didn't have to. Then, as we began to have more and more problems getting government to work and our social institutions to work, people look back and say, what did Eisenhower do right? Why was the country running so smoothly and well without anybody doing anything? And so, instead of him being a know-nothing president, they said, maybe we should learn something from this guy. We would like government to run smoothly like it used to run. And I mean, this is not imaginary. This is historians' thoughts looking back at this guy. So anyways, we'll go from there. This is the actual resolution. You can see it on your screen. I think I've been showing people doing my editing for me here. Section 7 of the law passed, and I think I don't have it on this screen, but it's 54. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, a little more of what Eisenhower did, because it brings back some of our culture, our history, and our affinity with divinity, if you want to say it fancy like that. Our love for God and country. It's an American thing. It has always been an American thing. It's not a bunch of crazy, right-wing, wild patriots. This has been the mainstay of American thinking for hundreds of years. In 1956, 2 years after pushing to have the phrase "under God" inserted in the Pledge of Allegiance, President Dwight Eisenhower signed a law officially declaring, "In God we trust." He wanted to put on all of our paper money. Since the Civil War, it was on our coins, "In God we trust." Eisenhower says, I want it on every bill that's printed. The idea came from his treasurer, and he wholeheartedly supported it. And so since then, and I'm going to show you some greenbacks here, in the center of it, it says, "In God we trust." Just take a look at any bill. So that's where that came from. So, oh, this is a recent thing. Eisenhower put these in. No, yes, if that were alone, you could get away with that. But when we get into historical quotes going back to the colonial period, our founding fathers, the signers of the Declaration of Independence, you're going to find that Eisenhower was in sync with the founding fathers in a big way. So, I have a picture on the screen. You look at it. This is the original coin that said, "In God we trust," minted in 1864. The law that made that possible was signed by Abraham Lincoln. It was the last law he signed before he was assassinated. So if you will, the last thing that Lincoln did is put on our coins, "In God we trust." So that's how it is. I believe those circumstances and details and the timing were ordained of God. The idea of the founding fathers, the superseding, the overarching idea was, if our faith was in God, and this to them was the God of the Bible, really the God of the Ten Commandments. This was a moral God. This was a just God. This was an all-powerful God. If we have faith in Him and honor His laws and His commands, then our government will succeed. And if we do not, and we become an ungodly populace, then we will elect ungodly officials, and our democracy and constitution can work against us instead of for us. So they saw religion, especially the Christian religion and Christian values, as indispensable. You have to have them or this thing doesn't work right. So from there, I have last quote I'm going to give you, Eisenhower. He said this when he was inaugurated. The day he became president, he said, "A people that values privileges above principles soon loses both." I need to repeat that because I want you to always remember this. A people that values its privileges above its principles soon loses both. If we lose our principles, we lose our privileges, we lose our freedoms. And of course, anybody's read a Bible, when Israel lost its principles, it lost its privileges, and it became taken captive or became subject to another foreign power and some kind of tyranny. So it's a biblical principle, but it's a principle that, Americans, at least in the past, understood. Principles first, and then we can keep our privileges. If we lose the principles, the privileges go. Great quote, great leader. Now, let's go back to George Washington here. We have a picture of him praying here, I think at Valley Forge. And, are we really one nation under God? I don't want you to take my word for it. I'm going to stick, the people editing this thing, I think Bob is doing the editing for me on this thing. I said, Bob, get my picture off the screen, front and center. I want people to see the quotes. I want them to see what Franklin said, what Washington said, what Adams said, what Hamilton said. And look at their words, not mine here. So we're going to go to some of those quotes. We're in the Declaration of Independence here. And just look at this as a document. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. The Declaration of Independence is a creationist document. They believe that man was created by an almighty, all-powerful God. That was a universal belief of the Founding Fathers. That's why they all signed to this. And that among these unalienable rights given to us by our Creator are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They are God-given rights, and God gave them to us, and we want to honor God so that He doesn't take them from us, or we allow them to be taken from us, should we say. So, 56 of the Founding Fathers signed this document. It was treason back in England. And if they lost the war, these men were, as Franklin said, if we do not all hang together, we will hang separately. That's what he said. He understood they could get lynched for doing this thing. This was treason to the English crown. Now, I have a photo here of the original statement, our Declaration of Independence, July 4, 1776. And this came to my attention that 29 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence had college degrees from colleges or universities that were all founded for the purpose of training clergy and ordaining men to preach the gospel. Now those institutions gave other degrees, but number one, they were trained, they were well read, they were educated, these were thinking men. And when it came to forming a new government, they were looking at different philosophers and statesmen and what people had said, and looking at the best ideas that were out there to form the best government. So we had an educated leadership who was studying and said, well, this hasn't been done before. What will work best? And we're going to actually look at some of the people that they were reading and quoting and talking about, and how their ideas got into our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence. It's a fascinating study. I'll touch on it. I wish I could do more. The next several quotes that you see come from a book, one of my favorite books here. It's not a novel. It's a book of quotations, America, God, and Country, by William Federer. Excellent book, loaded with quotes from Americans of different ages, notable Americans, in regards to God and country. And you'll see the quotes here. When the quote is from someplace else, I will let you know. It'll be in the slide presentation that you'll see. So, first one, George Washington. Of course, lovingly known as the first in war, the first in peace, and the first in the hearts of his countrymen. He did not want to be king. He did not want to run the world or the country. He wanted democracy with checks and balances and a limit to presidential power. And he didn't want the tyranny that came with a crown. Thank God we had such a first leader who was happy to do his terms in office and then go home to Mount Vernon and let someone else run the government. We need men like that today. Anyways, he said this: it is impossible to rightly govern the world without God and the Bible. I believe that to be true. You go to a country where the predominant religion is not Christianity and the values are not Christian values and say, we'll start a democracy, we'll have a constitution. You're not going to get the same results our founding fathers had. Because I said this thing will work right if we have these underlying principles and truths in action and in the hearts of men. And they're religious things. Here we are. Well, we're going to show them to you. So, one of the things that Washington was known for saying is that in winning the war, there were many times he realized that God intervened or we would have lost. So he says it this way: Providence has heretofore taken us up when all other means and hopes seem to be departing from us. In this I will confide. What's he saying? God intervened or we would have failed. And at many times. I'll mention one thing about how we say, against all odds, we won our war against England. When the British put a blockade on Boston, and then Washington brought up the troops and surrounded the land part of Boston, they were locked in, but nobody really attacked each other. They shot some cannons at each other, and marched around, but they didn't really fight with each other per se. But when this was going on, he had a conference with his commander, so I want to know how much ammunition our troops have. And he's sitting with a bunch of different generals and leaders with him, and someone says, we have enough for each of our soldiers to take 3 shots. And the word was that Washington was in shock and didn't say anything for the next hour. And of course, what's going on in his head? I could try to win a war, and these guys can only shoot the rifles 3 times? Oh my, we would say in modern English, he's freaking out inside. How are we going to do this? So the same man would say, Providence has heretofore taken us up when all other means and hopes seem to be departing from us. In this I will confide. By the grace of God, we won that war. That's what he believed, and that's what the founding fathers believed. And by the way, I've seen secular historians, the man who wrote the recently a book called 1776, he's not a Christian, you can tell by the way he writes, but he says, I don't know what you believe about divine intervention, but how can you explain this? So without preaching a message, he's saying, something bigger than us did something or would have lost that war. Let's put it that way if you're not particularly religious. Now, we were once a nation, and I'm going to say once because I don't believe this is so true anymore. We were once a nation that truly looked to the Bible and the teachings of Jesus Christ as a guiding light on personal decisions and on moral, social, and political issues. And I want to back it up here. Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thomas Jefferson is known not as a Christian, but as a deist. And the deists believe that we have a creator God that made the universe, but he's not too involved in it. Jefferson was a bit of a heretic, if you will, if you want to call him a Christian. You say, well, how can you call him a heretic and then say, well, wonderful things? He said, well, I'll explain. He took the New Testament and took all the miracles of Jesus out of it, called the Jefferson Bible. I mean, this is a piece of heresy. But on the other hand, Jefferson believed, he'd read all kinds of different philosophies and philosophers and different religions, religious beliefs, and he believed that the teachings and doctrine of Jesus were the best moral teachings in the world and that we should live by them. So at least to him, Jesus was the world's greatest moral teacher, and his teachings would bring a blessing on America if we kept them. If I don't exactly, I don't call him a Christian. But this is where, Christian values often get into people who are not Christians to their benefit. They say all truth is God's truth. And that's one form of that. So here's Jefferson in action. And remember, he's chopped up a Bible and taken out the miracles. It's bad. It's very bad. But he laws the moral teachings of Jesus Christ, the Savior. So when he becomes president, the third president of the United States, 1801 to 1809, he also becomes the head of the Board of Education of Washington, D.C. And he has to decide, well, what kind of curriculum are we going to have in Washington, D.C. in our public school? Here was his plan. The plan devised by Jefferson was to have students learn to read the Bible and Isaac Watts' Psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. So we have a man, I don't know. I have no idea if this man's a Christian or not. But on the other hand, he said, well, we want to educate these kids. They need to read a Bible so that they, have right moral standards in thinking and be good citizens. They need to read a Bible. And we want them to read psalms and hymns and spiritual songs by Isaac Watts, give them, a well-rounded education. Try doing that in a public school today. Oh my goodness. You can imagine the warfare that would go on. What craziness! Where did they get those wild ideas? Thomas Jefferson. Now, let's read Jefferson's words on this thing. His own religious and moral views. A more beautiful or precious morsel of ethics I have never seen. It is a document and proof that I am a real Christian, that is to say, a disciple of the doctrines of Jesus. I am a disciple of the doctrines of Jesus. This is a man who wrote the Declaration of Independence. This is where he's coming from. Secondly, Thomas Jefferson wrote that of all the systems of morality, ancient or modern, which have come under my observation, none appear to me so pure as that of Jesus. It's powerful. It's powerful. A founding father. Now, did God have his blessing on these men? This is a strange fact here. John Adams, our second president, and Thomas Jefferson, our third president, died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after they signed the Declaration of Independence. God is in control of times and seasons. I think he was telling us something here. My blessing is on what these men did. Well, now, I'm getting to my favorite quote here. We're going to get to Ben Franklin. And Ben Franklin was a dear friend and a good friend of George Whitefield, America's most famous evangelist. It's said that 80% of Americans heard this man preach. That's a powerful influence. And Whitefield wasn't quite sure of his friend's salvation, but friends they were. Because Franklin watched what happened to people when they listened to Whitefield preach, and he said, we need more of this. Whatever you're saying does good to these people. So they were good friends. And I could get lost in this thing because it's kind of exciting to see. But they come to our original government was an Articles of Confederation, and it did not work. The federal government was too weak. They could ask for tax money, but they had no way to collect it. And it's very hard to run a government with no money. They were trying to do that today, but I won't get into that. That got me lost again. I have to watch myself here. So, at this convention on June 20th, 1787, the delegates were embroiled in a bitter debate over how each state was to be represented in the new government. They had been meeting for 4 or 5 weeks and gotten nowhere. The hostile feelings created by the smaller states being pitted against the larger states was so bitter that some delegates actually left the convention and did not return. They just walked out on the proceedings. Ben Franklin comes to the rescue. And here is what he says. He's the governor of Pennsylvania. He's hosting the other delegates. He's 81 years old, so he's the senior statesman, and he's well respected by all. So he gets up to speak. This is recorded by James Madison, who became the fourth president. That Madison is writing down he wrote down what he believed Franklin said. Here was his address. Mr. President, this is Franklin speaking. The small progress we have made after 4 or 5 weeks, close attendance, continual reasoning with each other, our different sentiments on almost every question, several of the last producing as many no's as yeas, is methinks a melancholy proof of the imperfection of human understanding. In this situation of this assembly, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth and scarce able to distinguish it when presented to us, how has it happened, sir, that we have not heretofore even once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights to illuminate our understanding? Franklin is saying we're getting nowhere because we haven't prayed. He's very eloquent, but this is what he's saying. He's preaching here. And then he goes on, in the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for divine protection. Remember, guys? We prayed every day for divine protection. We knew we needed it. We're not doing that now. This is what he's saying to them. He goes on, our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in the struggle must have observed the frequent instances of a superintending providence in our favor. To that kind providence we owe this happy opportunity of consulting in peace on the means of establishing our future national felicity. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend? Or do we imagine we no longer need his assistance? He's chewing them out eloquently, politely, but really exactly. You think this is going to succeed without God's help? Are you crazy? This is how I would say, but this is how Franklin had said it. And then I have one more quote on him as he continues this speech to the delegates. I have lived, sir, a long time. And the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured in the sacred writings that unless the Lord builds a house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. Well, then he gave his advice, which was, let's pass a resolution that would begin each session in prayer. And then each Sunday while we're in Philadelphia, we all attend the same church. We go to different churches. We all go to the same church and we all worship together. The delegates did that. They began in prayer. And they attended church together to worship God. And as they asked for God's help, they put together one of the most brilliant civil documents ever written. And it has lasted and served us very well. They did it when they began to ask for God's help. And that was Ben Franklin. We're not the most religious of the bunch. Definitely not. I could go into all that. But he understood that when people prayed, God answered. And we need prayer. We need his help. We're not going to do this alone. Well, we're going to stop right there. We're going to have a part 2 of this. We're going to look at James Madison. He went a step further here. He sounds a little bit like Moses in a moment. But we'll get that on part 2 of this series on God and country, one nation under God.